The patrol cruiser Galtex Fang moved slowly through the dead system of Renar 9, its long gray hull sliding past broken rocks and old wreckage. This system had once been a mining colony, but a war 50 years ago had emptied it out. Now it was just a graveyard, full of drifting metal and forgotten ships. Captain Voru Dask of the Threxian Empire hated patrols like this one. Nothing ever happened out here. It was the kind of job they gave to officers who had made someone important angry. Voru Dask was a tall Threxian, with pale blue skin, and 4 eyes that could see in almost total darkness. He sat in his command chair, tapping his claws against the armrest, bored out of his mind. His crew felt the same way. The bridge was quiet except for the low hum of the engines, and the occasional beep of a sensor doing its job. Then one of those beeps became something else. "Captain," said Ensign Threll, a young officer barely out of training, "I'm getting a strange reading. Something big, just floating out past the third moon." Voru sat up straighter. "Define big." "Bigger than us, sir. Bigger than anything in this system should be." "It's not moving. No engine signature. No life signs that I can detect. It looks abandoned." Voru's 4 eyes narrowed. An abandoned ship, bigger than his own cruiser, sitting quietly in a dead system, was either a trap or the best luck he'd had in 10 years. Either way, it was worth checking. Anything was better than another day of empty scans and silence. "Take us closer," he ordered. "Slow and careful. If it's a trap, I want time to run." The Galtex Fang turned and moved toward the object. As they got closer, the shape on the screen became clearer, and every Threxian on the bridge went silent. The ship was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was long and smooth, built from a strange dark metal that seemed to drink in the light of their scanners instead of reflecting it. There were no visible weapons, no obvious armor plating, nothing that matched the design of any known empire in this part of the galaxy. And yet something about its shape suggested speed, and something about its silence suggested danger. "Scans show no power," Threll reported. "The whole ship is cold. Dead, sir. Whatever crew it had, they're long gone, or they never boarded it at all." Voru stood up from his chair and walked toward the view screen, staring at the strange vessel. "Send a boarding team. I want to know what this is, and who built it." 3 hours later, Voru Dask walked through the dark corridors of the mystery ship himself, wearing a heavy environmental suit and carrying a hand weapon that felt useless in a place this quiet. His boarding team had gone ahead, checking room after room, finding nothing alive, nothing moving, only strange furniture built for creatures with 2 legs and 2 arms, roughly the same size as a Threxian, but different in every detail. "Captain, you need to see this," came a voice over his comm. It was Lieutenant Gen, one of his best engineers. "We found the bridge." Voru made his way there, past rows of sealed doors and empty crew quarters. The bridge of the strange ship was smaller than he expected, built for a crew of maybe 6 or 7, with seats shaped for beings that sat very differently than Threxians did. In the center of the room stood a large console, dark and silent, like everything else, but Gen was already working on it with a portable power cell. "I think I can wake this thing up," Gen said. "The systems aren't damaged. It's just been sitting here, powered down, for who knows how long. If I connect an external power source—" "Do it," Voru said. Gen attached the cell. Lights flickered on across the console, dim at first, then brighter. Symbols appeared on the screens. Symbols in no language Voru had ever seen. Straight lines and curves, nothing like the flowing script of the Threxian Empire or the sharp angles of the neighboring Corveth Alliance. "It's alive," Gen whispered. "The whole system just came back online." Voru leaned over the console, watching lines of data scroll past. He didn't understand any of it, but one thing on the main screen caught his attention immediately. It was a map. A star map, showing a small section of the galaxy, with one star circled in a bright color, and marked with a symbol that looked almost like a small blue and green sphere. "What is that?" Voru asked, pointing. Gen tapped a few controls, trying to bring up more information. I think this might be a navigation log, Captain. A record of where this ship has been. And that circled star, it looks like it might be marked as home." Voru felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Excitement. An abandoned ship of unknown design, sitting quietly in a dead system, with a working navigation system that pointed straight toward its home system. This was not bad luck. This was the discovery of a lifetime. Copy everything, Voru ordered. Every piece of data on this ship. I want it all sent back to my cruiser immediately. And prepare a tow line. We are bringing this ship home with us. Back on the Threxian capital world of Galvar Prime, news of the discovery moved fast. It took less than 2 weeks for word to reach the highest levels of the Threxian military, and less than a month for Grand Marshal Threx Voltarian himself to demand a full report. Grand Marshal Threx Voltarian was the supreme commander of all Threxian military forces, a position he had held for almost 30 years through a mix of skill, ruthlessness, and a talent for eliminating rivals before they became threats. He was old for a Threxian, his pale blue skin now touched with gray, but his 4 eyes were as sharp as ever, and his mind sharper still. He did not waste time on things that did not matter. But this mattered. He sat in his private command chamber, high in the grand spire of the capital, looking at a holographic image of the strange ship that Captain Voru Dask had found. Beside him stood General Caltrex Orn, head of Threxian Fleet Intelligence, and a nervous young engineer named Sathis Vel, who had been given the job of studying the alien ship's systems. "Explain it to me again," Threx Voltarian said, his voice low and calm, the kind of calm that made junior officers sweat. "Simply, I do not care about the technical details. I care about what this means." Sathis Vel swallowed hard before speaking. "Grand Marshal, the ship is built with technology that is, in some ways, more advanced than our own, and in other ways, strangely simple. Its hull material is stronger than anything we can currently produce. But its weapons systems, what few we found, are almost primitive by our standards. It is as if this species focused all their effort on speed, survival, and travel, rather than combat." "A scout ship," General Caltrex said, "built to explore, not to fight." "That is our best guess, yes," Sathis Vel continued, "but the most important discovery is the navigation computer. We have been working for weeks to decode its language, and we have made progress. The ship's records show a journey of exploration, moving farther and farther from a home system, before something happened. We believe the crew abandoned ship, though we found no bodies and no escape pods missing. It is possible they were rescued by another vessel, or they are still out there somewhere," Threx Voltarian finished. "It does not matter. What matters is the home system." Sathis Vel nodded quickly and brought up the star map on the holographic display. The image showed a section of the galaxy far beyond the current borders of Threxian territory, an area of space the Empire had never explored, mostly because it was considered a dead end, far from any major trade routes or resource-rich systems. "This star," Sathis Vel said, pointing to the circled point of light, "appears repeatedly in the ship's records as the point of origin. Every long journey in the log begins here. We believe this is the homeworld of whatever species built this vessel." Threx Voltarian stared at the star for a long moment, his 4 eyes reflecting the pale light of the hologram. "Do we know anything about this species? Have we ever encountered them before? Traded with them? Fought them?" "No, Grand Marshal," General Caltrex answered. "There is no record of contact with any species matching this ship's design in Threxian history, nor in the records of the Corveth Alliance that we have access to. Whoever they are new to us." "New," Threx Voltarian repeated, and something like a smile crossed his face, if a Threxian could be said to smile. "A new species, an unclaimed system, rich enough to build ships like this one, and we have their map." He stood up slowly, his old joints creaking, and walked closer to the hologram, studying the star as if he could see straight through it to whatever world orbited there. "Grand Marshal," Sathis Vel said carefully, "if I may, we know very little about this species. Their technology is unusual. It would be wise to send a scouting mission first, to observe from a distance before." "Caution," Threx Voltarian said, cutting him off, "is the excuse of the weak." He turned to face General Caltrex. "How many systems have we conquered in the last 50 years, General?" 11, Grand Marshal. "And how many of those species had technology that surprised us?" "None, Grand Marshal. We have always held the advantage." "Then why," Threx Voltarian said, "would this be any different? A species that builds fast, quiet ships but weak weapons is a species that has never had to fight for anything. Perhaps they are hidden behind some natural barrier, some empty stretch of space that has kept them safe from real threats. Perhaps they have grown soft, comfortable, unprepared. That would explain the poor weapons and the fine engineering. A peaceful people, undefended, sitting on a world we know nothing about. He looked back at the star. I want a full invasion fleet prepared, not a scouting mission, not a diplomatic envoy, a fleet. If this species is as weak as their weapons suggest, we will conquer their homeworld before they even understand what has happened to them. And if by some strange chance they are stronger than they appear, well, we will learn something valuable, and adjust our approach. General Caltrex hesitated, just for a moment. Grand Marshal, an invasion fleet of that size would take months to prepare. It would strip resources from 3 border systems. If this goes wrong, it will not go wrong, Threx Voltarian said, his voice suddenly sharp, ending the discussion. This is the opportunity of a generation, a new species, an unclaimed world, and we hold the map to their front door. I will not let this chance slip away because of caution. Prepare the fleet. I want it ready to depart within 4 months. Sathis Vel and General Caltrex exchanged a quick glance, but neither of them argued further. One did not argue with Grand Marshal Threx Voltarian more than once. As the 2 officers left the chamber, Threx Voltarian remained behind, staring at the hologram of the small blue and green symbol on the star map. He did not know the name of the world it represented. He did not know the name of the species who called it home, but he already thought of it as his. He had no idea what he was about to wake up. Far away, in a quiet office buried deep beneath the surface of a small, unremarkable world at the edge of known space, an alarm began to blink on a console that had not been active in almost a decade. The room was simple, almost plain, lit by soft white light. A woman in a dark blue uniform sat at the console, her eyes widening as she read the alert scrolling across her screen. She had worked this post for 6 years, and had never once seen this particular alarm activate. She had almost forgotten it existed. She picked up a secure comm line and spoke a single sentence, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. This is Deep Watch Station 7. We have a Class 1 contact alert. I repeat, Class 1 contact alert. The Meridian's transponder signal has just been picked up, active, outside of known Sol space. Requesting immediate confirmation and escalation to Earth Defense Command. On the other end of the line, there was a long pause. Then a voice, calm but serious, replied, Understood, Deep Watch 7. Escalating now. Someone found the Meridian. God help them. Earth Defense Command was buried 3 kilometers below the mountains of what had once been called Colorado, back when countries still had separate names and separate flags. That had changed after the Widow Plague and the 40-year silence, when humanity nearly wiped itself out and had to rebuild as one single, unified people. Now there was only Earth, one government, one fleet, and one mission. Never let what almost happened happen again. Fleet Admiral Naomi Reyes stood in the command center, arms crossed, staring at the star map that had just been pulled up on the main display. Deep Watch Station 7's alert had reached her desk within minutes, and she had called an emergency briefing before the hour was over. Around her stood the senior officers of Earth Defense Command, along with 2 members of the Unified Earth Council, sent to observe. Talk to me, Naomi said. The Meridian was lost 11 years ago. Presumed destroyed, no survivors, no wreckage ever found. Now its transponder just switched on, out past the Kelvar expanse, in territory we've never mapped. Someone found that ship. I want to know who. Commander Isaac Wren, head of Signals Intelligence, stepped forward. He was a thin man with tired eyes, the kind of eyes that came from spending too many years staring at data that never made sense until suddenly it did. Admiral, the transponder isn't broadcasting on its own. Something powered it up. We're picking up encrypted data bursts alongside it, patterns of communication we don't recognize. Based on the direction and strength of the signal, we believe it originated from an unknown vessel that boarded the Meridian and activated its systems, possibly by accident. By accident, Naomi repeated. So whoever found her doesn't know what they have. That's our assessment, yes, Isaac said. But Admiral, there's a bigger problem. The Meridian was a deep survey ship. Her navigation logs contained full route data going back to launch. Every jump, every waypoint, all the way back to Seoul. The room went quiet. Naomi felt her stomach tighten. She had commanded starships for 22 years, and she knew exactly what that meant. The nav logs point straight back to Earth. "Yes, Admiral," Isaac said. One of the council members, an older man named Director Petrov, leaned forward with his hands folded on the table. "Admiral Reyes, I need you to explain to me, in simple terms, how bad this is. We stopped broadcasting our location decades ago, specifically to avoid this kind of situation. How did the Meridian end up out there in the first place?" Naomi kept her voice level, though the weight of the question pressed on her. The Meridian was part of the last generation of deep survey ships, launched before the silence protocols were fully enforced. She was mapping star systems along the edge of known space when she went dark. We assumed she was lost to a system failure or an accident. We never assumed someone would find her intact, years later, with working systems. "And now," Petrov said, "some unknown power out there has a direct map to our front door." "That's the situation, yes," Naomi said. General Marcus Idawu, commander of Earth's ground and orbital defense forces, crossed his thick arms. He was a broad man, built like someone who had spent decades in combat before moving into planning. "Then we prepare. If someone's found that ship, it's only a matter of time before they follow the trail. We don't know who they are, we don't know how strong they are, and we don't know when they're coming. But we know they're coming." "We don't know that for certain," said Director Petrov quickly. "It's possible the finders simply record the data and move on. Perhaps they have no interest in traveling this far." Naomi shook her head slowly. "Director, with respect, I've spent my career studying how other species behave when they think they have an advantage. History has taught us that when someone believes they've found an easy target, they rarely walk away from it. We have to assume the worst and prepare for it. That's the only responsible choice." Petrov looked like he wanted to argue further, but the other council member, a sharp-eyed woman named Councilwoman Adeyeze Bello, spoke up instead. "Admiral Reyes is right. We built the entire defense doctrine of this planet around the assumption that someday, somehow, our location would be discovered. This is exactly the scenario we planned for. The question isn't whether we prepare, the question is how fast and how far we take it." Naomi nodded, grateful for the support. "Thank you, Councilwoman. Here is my recommendation. We activate Threshold Protocol immediately." A murmur passed through the room. Threshold Protocol was the highest level of defense readiness Earth had ever created, a plan built decades ago, in the aftermath of the Widow Plague, when humanity first truly understood how fragile their survival was, and how important it would be to never be caught unprepared again. It had never been activated, not once, not even during drills at full scale. General Idawu nodded firmly. "I agree. If there is even a chance that a hostile force is on its way to Seoul, we cannot afford to wait for confirmation. By the time we have confirmation, it may be too late to prepare properly." Activating Threshold Protocol means mobilizing every shipyard, every defense platform, every reserve fleet we have, Petrov said, his voice tight. "It means telling the public that Earth may be facing an external threat for the first time in living memory. Do you understand the panic that could cause?" "I understand it," Naomi said, "but I understand something else better. If we wait and do nothing, and an invasion fleet does come, we will lose far more than public calm. We will lose everything. I would rather deal with fear today than face annihilation tomorrow." The room fell silent again. Finally, Councilwoman Bello spoke. "I will bring this to the full council within the hour. Admiral Reyes, Threshold Protocol requires council authorization, but given the urgency, I will request emergency approval. In the meantime, begin preliminary preparations. We cannot afford delay." "Understood," Naomi said. "Commander Wren, I want everything we can learn about that signal, every scrap of data. If we can figure out who found the Meridian, we might get some idea of how much time we have." "On it, Admiral," Isaac said, already turning toward the door. As the meeting broke up and officers began moving quickly through the halls of Earth Defense Command, Naomi remained standing in front of the star map for a long moment, staring at the small marker representing the meridians. last known position, far beyond the edge of anything humanity had ever explored. 11 years ago, that ship had launched with a crew of 7, full of hope, searching for new worlds, new resources, new knowledge. Naomi remembered the day it left. She had been a young captain then, still commanding her first ship, and she had watched the Meridian depart from orbit with a strange feeling in her chest, a mixture of pride and worry that she never quite understood at the time. Now she understood it perfectly. Some part of her must have known, even then, that a ship built to find new worlds might one day lead something dangerous straight back to their own. "Admiral," said a voice behind her. It was Lieutenant Sarah Kim, one of her aides, holding a data pad. "Preliminary reports are already coming in from the shipyards. Orbital Yard 3 says they can have the mothballed defense platforms back online within 3 weeks if we push hard. Yard 7 is asking if they should halt civilian construction to focus entirely on military production. Tell Yard 7 yes," Naomi said. "Full military priority, effective immediately. And get me a call scheduled with Fleet Commander Okafor. If Threshold Protocol goes active, I want the entire fleet reorganized and ready within 2 months, not 3. 2 months is going to be tight, Admiral," Sarah said carefully. "I know," Naomi said, "but we don't know how much time we have. We might have years, we might have months. We plan for the worst and hope for more time than that." Sarah nodded and hurried off to relay the orders. Naomi turned back to the star map, her eyes settling once more on the marker representing the Meridian. Somewhere out there, an unknown power had just found the key to Earth's front door. She didn't know their name, she didn't know their strength, she didn't know their intentions. But she knew one thing for certain: Earth would be ready. 4 months later, in orbit above Galvar Prime, the Threxian invasion fleet gathered in numbers that had not been seen since the Empire's last great war of conquest. 300 warships, from massive dreadnoughts bristling with plasma cannons to swift strike cruisers designed to break through planetary shields, formed into perfect formation under the pale light of the Threxian sun. Grand Marshal Threx Voltarian stood on the observation deck of his personal flagship, the Voltarian's Will, watching the fleet assemble below him with quiet satisfaction. Beside him stood General Caltrex Orn, who had spent the last 4 months overseeing every detail of the invasion's preparation, and who still, privately, held doubts about the entire plan. 300 ships, Threx Voltarian said, admiring the view. The largest fleet the Empire has assembled in a generation, all to conquer a single world we know almost nothing about. Some might call that excessive, General. Some might call it wise, Grand Marshal, Caltrex replied carefully. We are traveling into unknown territory, against an unknown enemy, based on data recovered from a single derelict ship. I would rather bring too much strength than too little. A rare moment of agreement between us, Threx Voltarian said, almost amused. Tell me, has our engineer made any further progress translating the ship's records? Sathis Vel has completed most of the translation work, yes, Caltrex said. The species calls itself human. Their homeworld, according to the records, is called Earth. Beyond that, we know very little. Their ship logs describe a history of great conflict on their own world before achieving unification, but no records of conflict beyond their home system. We believe they are new to interstellar contact, possibly having only recently developed the technology for long-range travel. New, Threx Voltarian repeated, savoring the word. Undefended, unprepared, exactly as I predicted. There is one more thing, Grand Marshal, Caltrex said, his tone growing more cautious. The ship's logs also included several passages that Sathis Vel could not fully translate, references to something called Threshold Protocol and something called the Widow Plague. We do not know what these mean, but the tone of the record suggests these were events of great significance to the humans, possibly some kind of past catastrophe. Threx Voltarian waved a clawed hand dismissively. Every species has its old wounds, General. Every species has stories of disasters and dark times in their history. It means nothing. What matters is what they have now, and what they have now is a single unified world, with weak weapons and strong engineering, ripe for conquest. He turned to face the massive fleet gathered outside the viewport, his 4 eyes gleaming with something close to hunger. Set course for the coordinates recovered from the human ship. We depart within the hour. By the time this campaign is finished, the name Threx Voltarian will be remembered not just as the conqueror of 11 worlds, but as the one who discovered and claimed an entirely new species for the glory of the Threxian Empire. General Caltrex bowed his head, though his 4 eyes remained troubled as he turned to relay the orders. Somewhere deep inside him, a small voice kept repeating the words from the ship's logs that Sathis Vel had not been able to translate. Widow Plague. Threshold Protocol. He hoped, for the sake of the Empire, that those words truly meant nothing. But something told him they meant everything. The Threxian fleet traveled for nearly 6 weeks through empty space, crossing distances that no Threxian vessel had ever crossed before. The journey itself taught them things about the humans that their translated records could not. Twice, the fleet's long-range sensors picked up strange, faint signals, quickly gone, that Sathis Vel believed might be automated relay beacons, silent watchers left along the edge of human territory. Each time, Grand Marshal Threx Voltarian ordered the fleet to continue without slowing, unwilling to let anything delay his glory. What he did not know, what none of the Threxians knew, was that those faint signals were exactly what they seemed to be. Earth had built a network of hidden sensor buoys, stretching far beyond its own borders, quiet sentinels placed decades ago, as part of the very same defense doctrine that had created Threshold Protocol. Each time the Threxian fleet passed near one of these buoys, a silent alert traveled back through relay after relay, all the way to Earth Defense Command. By the time the Threxian fleet reached the outer edge of the Kelvar expanse, Fleet Admiral Naomi Reyes already knew, almost to the day, when they would arrive. "Confirmed contact, Admiral," Commander Isaac Wren said, standing before the main display in the Earth Defense Command war room. The room had changed dramatically over the past 4 months. What had once been a quiet, strategic office now buzzed with constant activity. Officers moving between stations, screens filled with fleet deployment data, supply chains, and readiness reports. Buoy 12 picked up a large fleet signature 3 days ago. Based on size and speed, we estimate between 250 and 350 vessels, moving on a direct course towards Seoul. Naomi studied the data calmly, though her heart was pounding. 4 months of preparation had led to this moment, and now it was finally, truly real. Time to arrival? At their current speed, approximately 11 days, Admiral. Fleet Commander Daniel Okafor, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and a calm, steady voice, stepped up beside her. He had spent the last 4 months reorganizing the entire Earth fleet under Threshold Protocol, and though the work had been exhausting, he looked ready. 11 days is enough time to finish final preparations, Admiral. Every shipyard has completed its production quotas. Every reserve vessel has been reactivated and crewed. We're as ready as 4 months of frantic work can make us. How does our fleet compare to theirs, in raw numbers? Naomi asked. We've got 180 vessels in active service, plus 40 automated defense platforms in high orbit, and another 60 in reserve, mostly older ships pulled from mothballs, Daniel said. So on paper, they outnumber us close to 2 to 1, maybe more, depending on how we count their support vessels. And that doesn't worry you? Naomi asked, watching him carefully. Daniel allowed himself a small, tired smile. Admiral, with respect, I've read every scrap of intelligence we've gathered on this fleet from the Meridians. Stolen data trail, combined with what our buoys have picked up during their approach. Their ships are big, and they're heavily armed by their own standards, but their tactics, based on formation patterns and communication signatures, suggest a fleet that has never fought a defender who was actually ready for them. They've won every previous conflict through overwhelming numbers and surprise. We're taking away their surprise. That changes everything. Naomi nodded slowly. He was right, and she knew it. Numbers mattered, but numbers weren't everything. Humanity had learned that lesson the hard way, over and over throughout its long, difficult history, and it was a lesson Earth Defense Command had built its entire strategy around. What about civilian evacuation status? She asked. All non-essential personnel have been moved to the deep shelters, Daniel reported. Orbital stations have been cleared down to skeleton crews, all combat trained. The Council has authorized full activation of the planetary shield network, though we're keeping it powered down until the enemy fleet is actually in range. No sense giving away our full capabilities before we have to. Good, Naomi said. Let them come in thinking they already know everything about us. Let them believe what the Meridians logs told them. A peaceful, undefended species with weak weapons. Every wrong assumption they carry into this system is an advantage for us. She turned to look at the massive display showing Sol System, with its careful arrangement of defense platforms, hidden minefields, and fleet positions that had taken months to plan. Somewhere out there, an alien fleet was approaching, confident in its strength, confident in its coming victory. They had no idea what they were flying into. 11 days later, the Threxian fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, at the edge of Sol System. 320 warships forming into their standard conquest formation, a wide crescent shape designed to sweep forward and crush any resistance beneath overwhelming force. On the bridge of the Voltarian's will, Grand Marshal Threx Voltarian stood tall, watching the system spread out before him on the main view screen. A single yellow star, 8 planets, and somewhere among them, the small blue and green world that had been marked on the human ship's navigation logs. "Report," he said. Sensor Officer Grath, a nervous young Threxian who had never served on a mission of this scale, checked his readings quickly. "Grand Marshal, we are detecting minimal activity in the outer system. A handful of automated mining stations, some kind of research outpost near the 4th planet, and light traffic near what appears to be the primary inhabited world, the 3rd planet from the star." "Weapons? Defenses?" General Caltrex asked, standing near the command chair, his 4 eyes scanning the readouts with far more caution than his commander. "Nothing significant detected, sir," Grath reported. "A handful of small vessels near the 3rd planet, likely local patrol craft. No large warships. No planetary defense grid that we can identify." Threx Voltarian allowed himself a satisfied hum, low in his throat, exactly as expected. A species with fine engineering and no capacity for war. Move the fleet forward. Begin our approach to the 3rd planet. I want to see this human homeworld with my own eyes before we begin the conquest. The fleet moved forward, crescent formation intact, engines glowing bright against the darkness of space. As they passed the outer planets, sensor readings continued to show almost nothing. Quiet traffic, a few automated stations, no sign of any real military presence anywhere in the system. General Caltrex found the silence unsettling rather than reassuring, though he kept his concerns to himself. In 11 successful conquests, he had never seen a species simply allow an invading fleet to approach without any visible resistance at all. Even the weakest, most primitive worlds the Empire had conquered had scrambled some kind of defense, however hopeless, however doomed. This silence felt wrong. "Grand Marshal," he said carefully, "might I suggest we slow our approach and send scout vessels ahead of the main fleet? If their defenses are simply well hidden rather than absent, we would be walking directly into—" "Caution again, General?" Threx Voltarian interrupted, not unkindly, but with clear impatience. "We have crossed half the galaxy for this moment. I will not creep toward our prize like a frightened animal. We came here to conquer, not to hide behind scouts and delays." Caltrex bowed his head slightly, saying nothing further, though the uneasy feeling in his chest only grew stronger as the fleet continued its steady approach toward the 3rd planet. As the Threxian fleet passed the orbit of the 4th planet, small red dots began appearing on the outer edges of their sensor displays, faint at first, then growing steadily in number. "Grand Marshal," Grath said, his voice suddenly tight with tension, "I'm picking up new contacts." "Many new contacts. They're appearing all across the system, sir. Dozens of them. No, wait. Hundreds." Threx Voltarian's 4 eyes snapped toward the main display, where the calm, empty starfield of moments ago had suddenly transformed. Defense platforms, previously hidden through some combination of stealth technology and simple silence, powered up across the entire system, their weapon signatures blazing to life on Threxian sensors like a field of stars igniting all at once. And moving out from behind the 3rd planet, no longer hidden, no longer silent, came a fleet of human warships, sleek and dark, exactly as many as the automated defense platforms had suggested, forming into tight, disciplined formations that spoke of careful planning rather than panicked improvisation. "That is not," General Caltrex said slowly, staring at the numbers scrolling across his display. "A peaceful, undefended species." Grand Marshal Threx Voltarian's 4 eyes stared at the human fleet spreading out before them, his earlier confidence faltering for just a moment before his pride reasserted itself. "No matter their numbers," he said, his voice hardening, "they are still untested against Threxian firepower. Whatever they have prepared, we outmatch them in raw strength. Sound general quarters. All ships, prepare for engagement." Across the Threxian fleet, alarms began to blare, weapon systems charging, shields raising, 320 warships preparing for what their Grand Marshal still believed would be an easy, glorious conquest. But on the bridge of the human flagship, the Endurance, Fleet Admiral Naomi Reyes watched the massive alien fleet on her own display with steady, calculating eyes. Beside her, Fleet Commander Daniel Okafor studied the same readings, and for the first time in months, allowed himself a small, grim smile. "They came in thinking we were an easy target," Naomi said quietly. "Let's show them exactly how wrong they were." "All ships report ready, Admiral," Daniel confirmed. "Defense platforms are fully charged. Minefields are armed and waiting along their most likely approach vectors. Whenever you give the word." Naomi took a slow breath, looking at the enemy fleet one final time. 320 warships full of confidence, full of certainty, full of pride, about to learn something that every enemy of Earth eventually learned the hard way. "Give the order," she said. "Let's begin." The battle for Sol system began not with a charge, but with silence. A silence that lasted only seconds, but felt much longer to everyone watching the displays on both sides. Then the first minefield activated. As the Threxian fleet advanced along its crescent formation, following the most direct path toward the third planet, the leading ships passed through a wide stretch of space that appeared, on every sensor reading, to be completely empty. It was not empty. Scattered across thousands of kilometers, disguised with the same stealth technology that had hidden Earth's defense platforms, thousands of small automated mines waited in perfect silence, each one carrying enough destructive force to cripple a warship many times its size. The mines detonated in a rolling wave, one after another, tearing through the front line of the Threxian fleet, before a single shot had been fired by either side. 6 warships were destroyed outright in the opening seconds. Another dozen took heavy damage, their shields flaring and failing under the concentrated force of explosions they never saw coming. On the bridge of the Voltarian's will, alarms screamed as damage reports flooded in from across the fleet. Grand Marshal Threx Voltarian stared at the display in stunned silence for a moment before his training took over. "Report, what happened?" he demanded. "Minefield, Grand Marshal," Grath said, his voice shaking. "A hidden minefield, undetectable until detonation. We've lost 6 vessels outright, with heavy damage across the front line. Evasive maneuvers, all ships, now," General Caltrex ordered, taking initiative while Threx Voltarian was still processing the sudden loss. "Spread the formation, reduce our density, minimize further losses." The fleet scattered outward, breaking from its tight crescent formation, ships moving to avoid the areas of space where mines had already detonated. It was the correct decision, but it came at a cost. As the Threxian ships spread out, they moved directly into the range of Earth's orbital defense platforms. 40 massive weapon stations positioned throughout the system, each one capable of delivering devastating firepower against any target within range. The defense platforms opened fire. Streams of concentrated energy weapons lanced out across the darkness of space, striking Threxian warships from multiple angles at once. Unlike the mines, which had struck without warning, this was open combat, and the Threxian ships fought back, their own weapons blazing against the defense platforms and against the human fleet that was now closing the distance from the third planet. Fleet Admiral Naomi Reyes watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Endurance. Her expression calm, despite the chaos filling the tactical display. "Status report," she said. "Minefield performed exactly as projected, Admiral," Daniel Okafor reported. 6 enemy vessels destroyed, 12 more showing significant damage. Defense platforms are engaging the scattered formation now. Enemy fleet has lost cohesion. They're fighting in smaller groups instead of a unified front. "Good," Naomi said. "That's exactly what we wanted. Bring the fleet in now. Focus our attacks on their damaged and isolated vessels first. Don't let them regroup." "Yes, Admiral." The human fleet surged forward, 180 warships moving with practiced precision. striking hard and fast at the weakened sections of the Threxian formation. Unlike the alien fleet, whose tactics relied heavily on overwhelming numbers and simple, direct assaults, the human fleet fought with coordinated strikes, small groups of ships working together to isolate and destroy individual targets before moving on to the next. It was a style of warfare the Threxians had never encountered before, born from centuries of hard-won lessons on humanity's own homeworld, refined through decades of careful planning after the Widow Plague nearly ended human civilization entirely. Every officer in the Earth fleet had trained for exactly this kind of engagement, fighting against a numerically superior force through discipline, coordination, and the willingness to take calculated risks that a more cautious enemy would never expect. On the bridge of the Voltarian's will, Threx Voltarian watched his once proud fleet being torn apart with growing disbelief. "This is not possible," he muttered, watching another cluster of his warships fall to a coordinated human strike. Their records showed nothing of this. Weak weapons, a peaceful people. "This cannot be the same species." Grand Marshal, General Caltrex said, his voice tight with barely controlled urgency. "I believe we underestimated them severely. Their weapons are not weak. They are simply different from ours, designed for precision rather than raw destructive force. And their tactics suggest a species with far more combat experience than we assumed." "Impossible," Threx Voltarian snapped. Their own records showed no conflict beyond their home system. "Perhaps," Caltrex said carefully. "Their conflict never left their home system, Grand Marshal. Perhaps that is exactly the point. A species that fought its wars at home, against itself, learning every hard lesson war can teach, before ever setting foot among the stars." Threx Voltarian said nothing, his four eyes fixed on the display, as another Threxian warship exploded under concentrated human fire. For the first time in his long, successful career, doubt crept into his mind. "Order the fleet to regroup," he said finally. "Full retreat to the outer system, then reform for a second, more organized assault. We will not lose this campaign to poor tactics." "Grand Marshal," Caltrex said, "I strongly recommend a full withdrawal from the system entirely, not merely a retreat to the outer edge. Our losses are already severe, and their defenses appear to extend throughout the entire system, not merely near the third planet." "I did not ask for your recommendation on withdrawal, General," Threx Voltarian said sharply. "I asked for a regrouping maneuver. We came here for conquest, and we will not leave in disgrace after a single engagement." Reluctantly, Caltrex relayed the order, and the scattered Threxian fleet began pulling back toward the outer edge of the system, still under fire from pursuing human vessels and defense platforms as they retreated. 3 hours later, what remained of the Threxian fleet had gathered at the outer edge of Sol's system, far beyond the range of Earth's defense platforms. The numbers were grim. Of the 320 warships that had entered the system with such confidence, only 260 remained, and many of those carried significant damage. In the command chamber of the Voltarian's will, Threx Voltarian sat in silence, staring at the casualty reports scrolling across his display. 60 ships lost, thousands of Threxian lives, gone in a single afternoon, against a species his own intelligence had labeled peaceful and undefended. "Grand Marshal," General Caltrex said quietly, standing before him, "I believe we must reconsider our approach entirely. This is not a conquest we can win through direct assault. Their defenses are too well prepared, their tactics too disciplined." Threx Voltarian did not respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of its earlier confidence. "How did we miss this, Caltrex? How did our intelligence fail so completely?" "I believe," Caltrex said carefully, "that we saw exactly what we wanted to see, Grand Marshal. Weak weapons on a single scout ship, and we assumed it meant a weak species. We never considered that a species might build gentle, quiet ships for exploration, while reserving their true strength for defense of their home. We judged them by the wrong measure." Threx Voltarian closed his four eyes for a long moment. "And now we have paid for that mistake in blood." "There is still a choice before us, Grand Marshal," Caltrex said. "We could withdraw entirely, return home, and report what we have learned. It would not be a victory, but it would preserve what remains of this fleet, and preserve the lives of everyone still serving under your command. Or Threx Voltarian asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer would not please him. Or we press forward with a second assault, Caltrex said, knowing now what we did not know before, accepting further losses in the hope of eventually overwhelming their defenses through sheer persistence. I do not recommend this option, Grand Marshal. I believe it would only compound our losses without any certainty of success. Threx Voltarian sat in silence for a long moment, weighing pride against wisdom, the two things that had guided his entire career, now standing in direct opposition to one another. Behind him, through the viewport, he could see the gathered remains of his once magnificent fleet, ships that carried the hopes of an entire empire, now scarred and battered by an enemy he had underestimated so completely. Finally, he spoke. "Prepare a second assault," he said, "but this time, we do not charge blindly into their defenses. We will study what we have learned. We will adapt." General Caltrex's 4 eyes showed something close to despair, though he bowed his head and relayed the order regardless. As a Threxian officer, he had sworn loyalty to the Empire and to his commander, even when he believed that commander was making a grave mistake. Far across the system, on the bridge of the Endurance, Fleet Admiral Naomi Reyes watched the retreating Threxian fleet gather at the outer edge of Sol System, her expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. "They're not leaving," she said quietly. "No, Admiral," Daniel Okafor confirmed. "Sensor analysis suggests they're regrouping, likely preparing for a second attempt. Should we press our advantage and pursue?" Naomi considered this for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the distant cluster of enemy ships. "No," she said finally. "We stay in the system. We let them come to us again, on our terms, in our territory, where every advantage remains ours. Prepare the fleet for a second engagement. And someone get me updated damage reports on our own losses." "We came through remarkably well, Admiral," Daniel reported. 12 ships damaged, none lost. The minefields and defense platforms did exactly what we hoped. Naomi allowed herself a small measure of relief, though she knew the battle was far from over. Whoever commanded that alien fleet had made a costly mistake in underestimating Earth's defenses, but mistakes could be corrected, and pride, however wounded, had a way of pushing commanders toward increasingly desperate decisions. "They'll come again," she said, more to herself than to anyone else, "and next time, they won't be so careless." She turned back to the tactical display, studying the positions of her own fleet, already planning for the battle still to come. 2 days passed before the Threxian fleet moved again. 2 days that Grand Marshal Threx Voltarian spent studying every scrap of data his intelligence officers could gather from the first engagement. Sathis Vel, the young engineer who had first translated the human ship's records, worked almost without rest, alongside General Caltrex, trying to understand exactly how the humans had fought, and how their defenses had functioned so effectively, against an overwhelming numerical advantage. "The pattern is clear now, Grand Marshal," Sathis Vel reported, during a tense briefing aboard the Voltarian's will. "Their defense platforms rely on early detection and coordinated fire. Their fleet fights in small, flexible groups rather than large formations. And their minefields, we believe, cover only certain regions of the system, likely the most direct approach routes toward their inhabited world." "Can we avoid the minefields on a second approach?" Threx Voltarian asked. "Possibly, Grand Marshal, if we approach from a different vector, farther from the direct path between the outer system and the third planet. It would take longer and expose us to different defense platforms, but it might avoid the worst of the minefield losses we suffered previously." General Caltrex studied the projected new approach route with a troubled expression. "Grand Marshal, even if we avoid the minefields, we will still face their defense platforms and their fleet directly. Our first engagement showed us that their tactics are simply superior to a direct assault, regardless of the specific path we take to reach them." "Then we adjust our own tactics," Threx Voltarian said, some of his old confidence returning, as a plan began to form in his mind. "We split our fleet into 3 separate groups, approaching from different directions simultaneously. Their forces cannot be everywhere at once. If we divide their attention, we divide their defense, and somewhere among our 3 approaches, we will find a path through to the inhabited world." Caltrex considered this. It was not a bad plan, better certainly than the single, direct assault that had cost them so dearly before. But something about it still troubled him, a nagging sense that they were still fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of their opponent. "Grand Marshal," he said carefully, "may I ask a question that has weighed on me since our first engagement?" "Speak," Threx Voltarian said. "Why do we continue this campaign at all? We have already lost 60 ships and thousands of Threxian lives against a species that has proven far more capable than we ever anticipated. Even if this second assault succeeds in reaching their homeworld, what victory could possibly be worth the cost we have already paid, and the cost still to come?" Threx Voltarian's 4 eyes settled on his general, with an expression that mixed anger and something almost like exhaustion. "You ask this now, after everything?" "I ask it because I believe it must be asked, Grand Marshal," Caltrex said, his voice steady, despite the risk in his words. "Pride led us into this system believing we faced an easy conquest. I fear pride alone now drives us to continue, rather than any true strategic purpose. We do not need this world. Our empire holds 11 conquered systems already, resources enough for generations. This campaign was born from opportunity, not necessity. Perhaps it is time to recognize when an opportunity has become a mistake." The command chamber fell silent. No one dared speak, while their Grand Marshal considered the words of his general, words that bordered on insubordination, but carried an uncomfortable weight of truth. Finally, Threx Voltarian spoke, his voice quiet. "Do you know what awaits me if I return home having lost 60 ships and thousands of lives, with nothing to show for it but a battered fleet and a story of defeat?" "I know, Grand Marshal," Caltrex said gently. "But I also know what awaits the Empire, if we lose the remainder of this fleet entirely. Chasing a victory that grows less certain with every passing hour. Better a difficult truth delivered by your own hand, than total disaster delivered by the enemies." Threx Voltarian sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the star map showing Sol System, and the small blue and green world that had seemed, 4 months ago, like the greatest opportunity of his long career. On the bridge of the Endurance, Fleet Admiral Naomi Reyes received an unexpected report from Commander Isaac Wren, who approached her with a strange expression on his tired face. "Admiral, we're picking up something unusual from the enemy fleet. A broadcast, on an open frequency, repeated several times over the last hour. Our translation systems have been analyzing the patterns from the meridians. Stolen data trail, cross-referencing with what we intercepted during the battle. We believe it might be an attempt at communication, Admiral." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Communication? After they attacked us without warning?" "That's our assessment, yes," Isaac said. "The broadcast pattern is different from their combat communications. Slower, more structured, repeated exactly the same way each time. It looks less like a battle command, and more like someone trying very hard to be understood by someone who doesn't speak their language." "Can we translate it?" "Partially, Admiral. Our best guess is that it says something like, request, communication, cessation of hostilities. But I want to stress that this translation is far from certain." Naomi considered this for a long moment. 4 months of preparation, 1 hard-won battle, and now, perhaps, an opening for something other than continued war. She had not expected this, but she had planned for every possibility she could imagine, and diplomacy, however unlikely it had seemed before the battle, remained the outcome she preferred above all others. "Open a channel," she said. "Use whatever translation capability we have. If they're truly requesting communication, I want them to know we're listening." Aboard the Voltarian's will. Grand Marshal Threx Voltarian watched as a response finally came through, on the same open frequency his officers had been using to broadcast their carefully worded request, crafted with painstaking effort, using the limited language data recovered from the meridian. The response was slow, halting, clearly assembled with similar difficulty on the human side, but the meaning came through clearly enough. "We hear you. State your intentions." Threx Voltarian stood in silence for a long moment, 4 eyes fixed on the translated words displayed before him. Behind him, General Caltrex waited, saying nothing, allowing his commander this moment to decide the path forward. Finally, Threx Voltarian spoke, and Sathis Vel worked quickly to translate his words into the halting, careful phrases the humans might understand. "We came seeking new territory, We did not expect the strength of your defenses. We request cessation of hostilities, and the opportunity to discuss terms. The response, when it came, took nearly 20 minutes to arrive, translated and retranslated by both sides, struggling to bridge a gap of language and culture that had never before been crossed. Terms will be discussed. Withdraw your fleet to the outer system boundary and hold position. A delegation will meet with your representatives under formal truce. Any aggressive action during this process will be met with full force. Threx Voltarian read the words carefully, feeling something complicated settle in his chest. Not quite relief, not quite shame, but something close to both at once. He had come to this system seeking easy conquest, and had instead found an enemy that had humbled him thoroughly, and yet offered him a path forward that did not require the complete destruction of everything he had brought with him. "Send our agreement," he said finally. "Withdraw the fleet to the outer boundary, as they have requested." General Caltrex allowed himself a small, quiet breath of relief. A wise decision, Grand Marshal. "Do not mistake this for wisdom, General," Threx Voltarian said, his voice tired, but honest, in a way it had rarely been throughout his long career. "This is simply the recognition of a mistake, made too late to prevent the cost we have already paid, but not too late to prevent an even greater one." 3 weeks later, a formal delegation from the Threxian Empire arrived under strict truce conditions to meet with representatives of Earth's Unified Council, aboard a neutral station established at the edge of Sol system, specifically for this purpose. Fleet Admiral Naomi Reyes stood among the human delegation, watching as General Caltrex Orn, chosen to represent the Threxian Empire in place of Grand Marshal Threx Voltarian, who had returned home to answer for the campaign's failure, entered the meeting chamber with careful, measured steps. The negotiations that followed were long and difficult, spanning weeks of careful discussion, translation, and slowly building understanding between two species who had begun their relationship with violence, but who both, in the end, preferred a different path forward. Earth would not become a Threxian conquest. That much had been settled beyond question on the battlefield. But something else emerged from those difficult weeks of negotiation, something neither side had expected when this strange chapter began. Trade agreements, cultural exchange, a cautious, careful peace between two very different peoples who had learned, in the hardest way possible, that first impressions could be dangerously wrong. Naomi Reyes stood at the observation window of the neutral station one evening, near the end of the negotiations, watching the stars outside, thinking about the long chain of events that had led to this moment. An old survey ship, lost 11 years ago, found by chance in a dead system far from home. A navigation log that should have led an enemy fleet straight to an easy conquest, but instead led them to the most difficult lesson of their long history of expansion. "Quite a journey," General Caltrex said, approaching quietly to stand beside her at the window, his 4 eyes reflecting the distant starlight. "It was," Naomi agreed. "For both of us, I think." "I confess," Caltrex said. "When Captain Voru Dask first reported finding your ship, none of us imagined it would lead here, to this conversation, standing beside the very species we came to conquer." Naomi allowed herself a small smile. "The Meridian was meant to find new worlds, new possibilities. In a strange way, I suppose it still did exactly that, even if it took a war to get there. Do you believe," Caltrex asked carefully, "that this peace between our peoples can truly last?" Naomi considered the question seriously before answering. "I believe peace is always a choice, made again every single day, by everyone involved. It's never guaranteed. But I believe it's worth choosing, worth working for, especially now that we understand each other a little better than we did before." Caltrex nodded slowly, his 4 eyes settling on the distant stars, thinking of his own homeworld, of Grand Marshal Threx Voltarian returning in disgrace, and of the strange, unexpected path that had brought two species together through conflict rather than tearing them apart entirely. "Then let us hope," he said quietly, "that this choice continues to be made, for many years to come." Far below them, Earth turned quietly in its orbit, protected once again, but changed forever, by the arrival of a fleet that had come seeking easy conquest, and found, instead, a species far stronger, far more capable, and ultimately, far more willing to build something new than anyone on either side had ever expected. The Meridians. Long journey, begun 11 years earlier in hope and curiosity, had finally, after everything, led somewhere worth reaching.